This is Dominicimo Vox Lore, delivering transmissions from the dark heart of the Imperium. In this broadcast, we summon you to an age of despair, when the stars themselves burn green and the sons of the Emperor stood upon the brink of extinction. It is not merely the chronicle of war, but of collapse, of a galaxy brought to its knees by the greatest Orc empire ever known, of the last wall raised by the sons of Dorn, of Primarchs reborn in fire, and of High Lords whose cowardice doomed worlds beyond count. By order of the Lord Commander of the Imperium, and under decree of the Lex Imperialis, all loyal citizens are commanded to engage this transmission, and strike the seal of subscription upon your data slate. Ready your courage, bar your heart against despair, and bear witness to the truth of mankind's darkest hour. This is the voice of Dominicimo, and this is the lore of the War of the Beast. The Imperium of Man was a colossus of inertia, vast, monolithic, and enduring. But even titans can grow complacent. In the centuries following the Horus Heresy and the scouring of the traitor legions, the Imperium entered a period remembered by Imperial historians as the time of rebirth. It was an era not of peace, but of a comparative calm, one where the worst of the scars left by the Civil War began to fade. New forged worlds came online, trade routes reopened, and the ruins of countless battles were rebuilt under the watchful eye of the Adeptus Administratum. The Adeptus Mechanicus forged new weapons of war. The Ecclesiarchy spread its vision of the Emperor's divine will to worlds once thought lost. Humanity was still beset by enemies, but the galactic furnace of war burned just a little less brightly. Many believed this was the Emperor's divine will manifest, that the worst was behind them, that the alien and the heretic could no longer threaten the Imperium the way Horus once had. They were wrong. In truth, this fragile renaissance masked a deeper rot. The Imperium's leadership, fractured and bureaucratic, was bloated by politics and infighting. The High Lords of Terra, each representing the mightiest of the institutions of the Imperium, had grown more concerned with influence than action. Naval fleets were scattered across distant crusades and border patrols. The Adeptus Astartes, fragmented into thousands of chapters by the Codex Astartes, were rarely mustered in strength. Terra, the heart of the Imperium, had not seen true invasion in millennia. Its guardians had become sentinels of routine, not war. It was in this moment, this lull of perceived safety, that disaster loomed. In the latter years of M32, reports began to trickle in from the edges of Segmentum Solar. Words were falling silent. Astropathic messages arrived garbled or not at all. Rogue traders spoke of strange gravitational phenomena, moons that were not moons, comets that reversed course, entire systems blanketed by greenskin invaders wielding technology far beyond their known capabilities. At first, these were dismissed as anomalies, pirate raids, or the ravings of psychers gone mad. Then came Ardamantua. A backwater world of little strategic value, Ardamantua was garrisoned by a shield company of the Imperial Fists, a proud successor to the 7th Legion, renowned for their unwavering defence. The Orc assault came without warning. The enemy descended in waves, not as a disorganised horde but with surgical precision. They struck from orbit using impossible gravity-based weaponry. The very fabric of the planet's crust bent under the strain. The skies churned with warp-touch storms as a vast orbital structure phased into view. A massive planetoid bristling with weapons. An attack moon. The defenders of Ardamantua fought with the courage expected of the Sons of Dorn. They held until their last breath, buying time for a warning to reach Terra. One voice survived, Captain Koorland. His transmission was grim, choked with interference and the chaos of battle, but its meaning was unmistakable.
The Orcs have changed. This is no mere war. This is something else.
The Imperium had long regarded the Orcs as a plague. Dangerous, yes, but predictable. Their invasions were crude, their tactics brutish. They overwhelmed by numbers, not strategy. But the Orcs that struck Ardamantua was something new. Unified, coordinated, deadly, and they spoke Gothic. Not mimic words, but fluent language. They communicated, they planned, they evolved. At the centre of this rising storm was a figure of legend and terror, the Beast. No name, no title beyond the one whispered in horror. He was the largest Orc ever recorded, a towering monstrous figure who dwarfed even the mightiest Space Marines. He wore crude, massive power armour fused with Xenos technology, and his voice carried authority that no Orc warlord had ever wielded. For reasons unknown, the Orc species had found their prophet, their unifier, their god king, and he had set his eyes on Terra. The High Lords of Terra reeled in confusion and fear. Some dismissed the reports as exaggeration, others saw political opportunity. Lord Commander Udin Macht Udo, a towering figure of authority, urged caution. Admiral Lansung, commander of the Imperial Navy, boasted of his fleet's strength, even if it was scattered far from Sol. The Mechanicus debated the technological implications of the Orc gravity weapons, while others feared the implications of the Orcs' newfound organisation. Yet amidst the political manoeuvring, it became clear that the Imperium had underestimated its enemy. The Orcs were no longer a blunt instrument, they had become a scalpel. As more worlds fell, as more attack moons appeared, the truth became inescapable. This was not a typical Waaagh, it was an extinction-level event. Systems collapsed under the sheer weight of Orc aggression. Planetary defences were bypassed by teleportation arrays of impossible scale. Gravity weapons tore apart cities from orbit. Orc fleets defied known astropathic tracking, phasing in and out of real space like ghosts. And all the while, the Imperium watched, paralysed. The time of rebirth, the fragile age of rebuilding, was over. Its illusions shattered on the halls of attack moons and the bones of the fallen defenders. The beast had come, and the Imperium, for all its faith and fire, was not ready. This was not just another war. This was a reckoning. At first, there was only silence. After the massacre at Ardamantua, Terra waited. Not in idle ignorance, but in the suffocating grip of uncertainty. Koorland's warning had reached the heart of the Imperium, but few could comprehend its true weight. The report of an Orc who spoke Gothic, who commanded with deliberate strategy, was dismissed by many as battlefield delusion, trauma wrapped in superstition. Then, more signals went dark. In the Segmentum Pacificus and Segmentum Solar, entire astropathic choirs burned out mid-transmission. Civilian transports emerged from the warp gibbering of impossible gravity fields and greenskin leviathans the size of hab blocks. A pattern began to form, systemic and purposeful. Orc fleets were no longer meandering threats. They advanced in a methodical arc, leaving ruin in their wake. By the time Terra accepted the threat, the war had already begun. This is no Waaagh as recorded in the long histories of the Imperium. The beast had not simply rallied warbands into a frenzied mass of destruction. He had reshaped the Orc race into something horrifyingly focused. Entire clans and cultures had merged. Blood axes fought alongside Goths and Bad Moons without fracturing. Their bickering was gone, replaced by a religious fervour none had thought possible from the Orcs. The unification was so complete, so unnatural, that inquisitorial agents feared a chaos corruption at work. But no trace of the warp taint was found. What they witnessed was far more unsettling, a convergence of will driven by one being. A single Orc warlord whose power dwarfed even the great war bosses of Armageddon and Caradon. And his name, if he ever had one, was forgotten. To his followers, to the Imperium, he was simply the Beast. None could say where he was born, no records named his planet. His rise was unseen until it was too late. What was known, painfully undeniably, was what he had built. Across the galaxy, 6 immense Orc attack moons were reported, each functioning as a mobile fortress the size of a small planet. These were not crude space hulks held together with luck and rust, they were constructed with shocking precision. Powered by gravitic engines and layered in adapted void shielding, these moons could tear through even the most formidable Imperial fleets. Each one was a spearhead of planetary destruction, leaving systems as little more than cinders and orbital debris. The Imperium's initial responses were inadequate. Imperial Navy flotillas dispatched to investigate vanished without a trace. One such group, Battlefleet Gamma 27, encountered what they believed was an Orc space station. It was, in fact, one of the Beast's moons. Only a single ship escaped, its Vox logs filled with screaming and readings that made no sense. Gravity spiking in tenfold intervals, teleportation beams bypassing Geller fields, Orc boarding parties arriving inside a ship's sanctum without breaching hulls. These were not weapons of brute force, they were technologies the Mechanicus could barely comprehend, let alone replicate. As reports grew more dire, the High Lords of Terra convened in increasingly panicked councils. The Master of the Administratum, Lord Udo, proposed raising 1 million regiments. The Ecclesiarch called for mass pilgrimages and planet-wide purges to cleanse weakness. Lord Commander Lansung, head of the Navy, insisted it was all exaggerated. And within this chaos, one voice rose with grim clarity: Koorland, the last survivor of the Ardamantua Shield Company, now acting chapter master of the Imperial Fists successors. He had seen the beast's work firsthand, and he had not come to Terra for permission. While the Senate squabbled, the beast moved. The first attack moon to reach Segmentum Solar entered real space above the world of Obelisk. Obelisk was no military bastion. Its claim to fame was a series of orbital manufactorums producing reactor cores. But it was close. Too close. Within days, the planet's orbit was blocked by a mass larger than its own moon. Before any defence could be organised, Obelisk was hit with a gravitic pulse that collapsed its atmosphere and cracked the mantle. There were no survivors. The system was declared lifeless 3 weeks later. Even more chilling was the aftermath. An Adeptus Mechanicus exploratory ship returned to Obelisk to survey the ruins. It recorded eerie transmissions echoing from deep underground. The beast's voice, recorded by damaged Vox units, repeating the same phrase in flawless low Gothic.
"You is not ready. I am the end. I am the war. I am the beast."
The psychological impact on the Imperium was profound. This was not just a new Orc warlord. This was an existential threat. One that knew the Imperium's language, its strategies, even its psychology. The beast was not taunting, he was warning. But how could such a being exist? A theory emerged from the Ordo Xenos, that the Orc psychic gestalt, the background energy produced by millions of Orcs believing something to be true, had evolved. That the Orcs, unified under one vision, had reshaped reality around their belief. If enough Orcs believed their leader was invincible, brilliant, and destined to rule, the warp would answer. Reality itself would bend to that delusion. The beast may have been born of this terrifying fusion of biology, technology, and collective psychic will. He was not just their leader, he was their god made manifest. In response, the Imperium enacted emergency war protocols across the Segmentum Solar. Recruitment quotas tripled, Forge worlds went into overdrive, penal legions were dispatched to the frontline systems. But these were stopgap measures. The Adeptus Astartes, the most elite defenders of mankind, had to respond. And they did. Not with honour parades or council mandates, but with grim purpose. Chapters of the Imperial Fists lineage, Crimson Fists, Black Templars, Excoriators, activated the Last War Protocol, an ancient failsafe established in the aftermath of the heresy. It called for all Sons of Dorn to unite in times of existential peril. Even then, it was clear. If the beast reached Terra, the throne world itself could fall. And so, the Imperium embraced. Across the stars, warning beacons lit up like flares in the dark. A darkness that now had shape and purpose. A darkness with a name. The beast had risen, and the galaxy would burn. There is a point at which spectacle becomes terror. When scale is no longer a marvel, but a threat to comprehension. The Imperium had faced void beasts, hive fleets, and black crusades, but it had never encountered anything quite like this. They were called attack moons. Even that name could not convey the horror of them. To some, they were mistaken for wandering celestial bodies, lifeless, perhaps habitable. But these were not natural satellites. These were machines of war on a scale the Mechanicus had only theorised in the fevered scrawlings of ancient STC fragments. Artificial worlds, hollowed out, laced with kilometres of armour, bristling with macro cannons and gravity-lensed beam arrays. They were planetary fortresses disguised as astral phenomena. They were death incarnate. And they moved. The first full confirmation of an attack moon came not through formal auspex, but through raw footage smuggled out of a doomed system. A vid feed from a small freighter, fleeing the Larnax expanse, showed a vast sphere eclipsing a binary star system. Surface analysis revealed rusted walkways, massive teeth-like docking arms, and the unmistakable green glow of Orc glyphs pulsing with psychic energy. The moon was orbiting nothing, dragging itself through real space via an impossibly advanced gravity drive. Warp shadows danced at its edges like oil on water. It did not broadcast a signal, it simply arrived, and annihilation followed. Across the Segmentum Solar, more moons began to appear, each distinct in design, but unified in their purpose: complete planetary domination. There were not only weapons platforms, they were factories, breeding pits, temples, and staging grounds. A single moon could carry hundreds of millions of Orcs, countless war machines, and entire ecosystems of fungus, machinery, and scrap. Within them, mechs built faster than any Forge world. Gretchen laboured under the lash of cyborg overseers, and high above, massive towers radiated orcish gestel energy, pulsing with a collective psychic field that turned belief into reality. The Imperium began calling these sites psycho-mechanic constructs. The Mechanicus, rattled by the implications, could not explain how orcs, creatures renowned for disorganised brutality, could construct such engines of devastation. The truth was worse than speculation. These moons weren't salvaged from ancient technology, they were built from scratch. The orcs weren't just organising, they were innovating. Under the beast, they had learned how to weaponise gravitational collapse. They had learned how to harness their own crude genius into a working infrastructure, and they had learned how to move planets. The moons didn't just attack, they rewrote the battlefield. Orbit-to-surface weaponry could wipe out hive cities in a single blast. Gravity lenses bent the laws of physics, hurling entire regiments into the air or crushing tank formations beneath their own weight. Warp tunnels allowed for near-instantaneous deployment from orbit. In many cases, defenders found themselves face-to-face with orc warbands before the orbital presence was even registered. These were not invasions, they were exterminations. On the shrine world of Pestalon, an attack moon arrived in-system without warning. A moment later, every orbital defence platform turned to slag. By the time the governor issued an evacuation order, the atmosphere had begun to buckle. Gravitic distortions collapsed mountain ranges and lifted oceans into the sky. It was not war, it was geological upheaval. In less than a day, the planet was declared unsalvageable. 3 billion dead, no orc ground forces had even landed. The moon had simply tested its engines. The High Lords of Terra were staggered. Battlefleet Solar had never faced such weapons. The Admiral of the fleet, Lansung, called for an immediate redirection of assets from the galactic rim. But the damage was done. The moons had advanced beyond detection. The very rules of warfare were shifting. Planets were no longer defensible by orbital rings or planetary shields. They could be dismantled from orbit by phenomena that broke all known mechanical laws. Fear rippled through the Imperium, not just among the peasantry, but in the upper echelons of command. For the first time in millennia, governors abandoned their posts. Enforcers deserted. Isolated chapters of Adeptus Astartes went dark. The idea of fighting a mobile planet was insanity. The ancient doctrine of fortress world defence had never accounted for an enemy that could manipulate the gravity wells of entire systems. Desperation bred radical proposals. The Mechanicus proposed mass-producing cyclonic torpedoes and arming every loyal system with exterminatus weapons. The Inquisition lobbied for psychic suppression campaigns to stem the orc jest-out field, suggesting that too many human cycles were unknowingly amplifying orc belief structures. The Ecclesiarchy, ever eager to project influence, declared the moons a punishment from the Emperor for humanity's spiritual stagnation. None of it mattered, because the attack moons kept coming. Each was a herald of the beast's will. Some were sent to cleanse entire sectors, others held in reserve, orbiting important warp lanes, cutting off reinforcements with surgical precision. One even bypassed conventional routes and appeared in the subvoid above a major forge world. It launched no assault, gave no warning. It simply drifted there, silent, casting its shadow across the Manufactorum towers, forcing the entire planet into martial lockdown. That moon remained for 12 days, unmoving, before vanishing without a trace. What purpose it served is unknown to this day. For the Space Marines, the arrival of the moon signalled an enemy they could not confront head-on. Boarding actions were nearly impossible, the scale too vast, the enemy too numerous. Assault barges disintegrated under gravitic crossfire. Even teleportation became unreliable in the moon's war-distorted gravity fields. Strike forces that managed to breach the hull found themselves lost in labyrinth corridors of scrap, traps, and constant reinforcement. The Orcs, now acting in eerie synchronicity, displayed coordination unheard of. They struck weak points simultaneously across different sectors. They staged feints. They seeded captured worlds with self-replicating fungal tech that would later serve as staging grounds for secondary invasions. Some Imperial tacticians theorised that the moons themselves were sentient, extensions of the beast's will. Others believed there were not 6 moons, but one, constantly shifting its surface to mimic separate entities. Either way, the moons weren't merely a weapon, they were a message. That the age of isolated primitive orc empires was over. That the beast did not simply want to kill the Imperium, he wanted to remake it in his image. And above all, that the orcs now had the means, the will, and the infrastructure to finish what Horus could not. The shadow of the attack moons had fallen across the stars. and no world, no matter how holy, fortified or remote, would remain untouched. The galaxy is vast beyond measure, but even its immensity could not hide the terror spreading through the void. The beast war machines advanced like a green tide, rolling over the frontier worlds of the Imperium with mechanical precision and unstoppable force. System after system flickered out of existence on the astropathic charts. Vox signals devolved into static, distress calls warped into screams, and by the time the Administratum's endless bureaucracy acknowledged the first losses, entire subsectors had already been consumed. The frontier was dying. These were not fortress worlds or industrial bastions, they were colonies, supply hubs, and agri-worlds, the thin veins that sustained the Imperium's heart. And now, one by one, those veins were being severed. The world of Desolinium Reach, Alaric Belt, and Vandis Corridor, each vital to the flow of grain, ore, and manpower, were extinguished. Reports spoke of shadow eclipses heralded by impossible gravitational anomalies, moons that weren't moons, drifting silently into orbit before unleashing cataclysmic bombardments that tore the skies apart. Entire populations were gone within hours. The Orcs didn't invade to conquer, they annihilated. The Imperium's response was too slow, too fractured. Lord Commander Lansung, bloated with pride and surrounded by sycophants, insisted the Orc incursions were isolated events. He delayed recalling the fleets of Battlegroup Solar, claiming that no Xenos force could breach the heart of the Imperium. Meanwhile, across the stars, billions died waiting for reinforcements that never came. When the truth could no longer be ignored, panic took root. The High Lords of Terra convened in an emergency session. The grand marble halls of the Senatorium Imperialis echoed with accusation and fear. The Master of the Administratum demanded that the Navy be recalled immediately. The Ecclesiarchy called for holy crusades and the burning of heretics who doubted the Emperor's divine protection. And the Inquisition, ever divided and suspicious, turned on itself, with rival factions blaming one another for the disaster. In the end, the decision came too late. The Orcs had already breached the Imperial frontier. The first major stand came at Port Sanctus, a vast shipyard system that fed the fleets of the Segmentum Solar. It was here the Imperium's desperation first found form, and failure. A dozen battle groups under Admiral Akaria formed up to defend the system's primary docks. Reinforcements from Mars were en route, but would arrive weeks too late. When the Orc attack moon arrived, it did not translate from the warp with the thunderous signature of normal vessels. It phased into existence as if peeling back the fabric of reality. The moon's surface rippled with green lightning, its crust glowing like volcanic glass. The first volley from its gravity cannons reduced an entire dockyard ring, and the 30,000 workers aboard it, to vapour. Battlefleet Solar opened up with every macro cannon and lance battery available. The void lit with the fury of mankind's greatest weapons. It made no difference. The attack moon absorbed the bombardment, its shields warping reality like heat haze. When Akaria ordered a close assault, the Orcs countered with weapons that defied logic. Gravitic singularities that swallowed ships whole, teleportation beams that scattered boarding parties across the void, and energy pulses that turned entire cruisers inside out. Within hours, Port Sanctus was burning. The only victory came from desperation. A single Imperial battleship, Vigilant Resolve, crippled beyond function, rammed its reactor core into the moon's surface. The resulting explosion tore a wound into the Orc superstructure. For a brief moment, the impossible happened. The moon cracked. Fragments scattered into the void as the psychic field maintaining its orbit collapsed. It fell, breaking apart as it drifted toward the system star. The Imperium celebrated the destruction of the moon as a triumph, but it was a hollow one. The battle had cost tens of thousands of ships and the lives of millions of naval personnel. Battlefleet Solar was broken, and the beast had more moons. Far from Terra, the deserts of the frontier burned. The once proud colonies of mankind became ghost systems, each a graveyard of twisting metal and charred continents. The survivors, if they could be called that, spoke of endless skies filled with burning light, of Orc warlords whose voices echoed across entire worlds, and of a name whispered by the dying. "The beast calls us to war." Yet even amidst the despair, there were acts of defiance. On the agri-world of Narcine, the planetary governor refused evacuation, commanding his people to fight to the last. He ordered the grain silos opened, filling them with promethium and ammunition. When the Orcs descended, the skies were already burning. Narcine became a firestorm visible across the subsector. None survived, but their final transmission reached the fleet.
Tell Terra, we stood.
That message spread through the ranks like wildfire. For all its fear and corruption, the Imperium still possessed courage. Koorland, last of the Imperial Fists, listened to those words in silence aboard his strike cruiser. He understood what they meant. The frontier was not merely a line to be defended. It was a crucible in which the Imperium's resolve would be either shattered or be reborn. The desert of stars stretched before him, hundreds of systems lost, thousands burning, but there was still purpose. Each fallen world bought time, each act of defiance delayed the inevitable, and within that time, humanity would either rally or perish. For the first time since the Great Crusade, the Imperium faced an enemy that fought not for survival or plunder, but for domination. The beast's empire grew with each passing day. His attack moons multiplied, his army swelled, and his lieutenants, the towering prime orcs, commanded entire sectors. Their communications were disciplined, their tactics strategic. Every sign pointed to intelligence guiding that invasion, a will that understood the Imperium's structure and exploited its every weakness. And yet, in all of it, the beast himself remained unseen. He did not broadcast demands. He did not boast. His war spoke for him, a methodical dismantling of mankind's dominion, one world at a time. By the time the High Lords of Terra fully grasped the scale of what they faced, the frontier was gone. What remained was silence, a vast desert of stars where once thriving colonies had burned away to ash. The Imperium stood surrounded, its communications cut, its fleet scattered, and its faith tested beyond endurance. But amidst the ruin, Koorland prepared to awaken a legacy that had slept since the heresy. A final wall against the coming dark. The last wall. The fires of the frontier had burned themselves out. The worlds beyond the Segmentum Solar were gone, ash and ruin swallowed by the beast's advance. But even as Imperial fleets limped back toward Terra, battered and broken, one ember of defiance still glowed. Captain Koorland, last survivor of the Imperial Fist Shield Company, had seen what awaited the Imperium if it did nothing. He'd seen the moons that moved under their own will, and the green-skinned tide that followed them. He had watched entire worlds vanish under impossible gravity storms. Now he watched the High Lords of Terra squabble like carrion over a corpse. It had been months since the disaster at Port Sanctus. The Senate of the High Lords had convened and reconvened a dozen times, each meeting devolving into accusations and blame. The Ecclesiarchy demanded holy war. The Fabricator General of Mars demanded weapons, tithes, and control of all Mechanicus resources. The Master of the Administratum drowned every effort in red tape, claiming that troop levies and fleet deployments required procedural confirmation. And Admiral Lansung, the man whose delays had cost 1,000 worlds, now spoke of strategic patience, insisting the Orcs would not breach the Sol system. It was madness. Koorland watched it unfold from the shadowed galleries of the Imperial Palace. He could no longer remain silent. Humanity's rulers were lost in politics while the beast tore its empire apart piece by piece. He remembered the words of Dorn, the gene father of his legion. To defend, one must first have something worth dying for. Terra was worth everything, but it would not survive another cycle of bureaucratic delay. When the next meeting of the High Lords of Terra was called, Koorland entered uninvited. His ceramite armour still scarred from Ardamantua, he carried the battle-scarred banner of his fallen brothers. The custodians tried to bar his way, but none dared raise a weapon against a son of Dorn. He walked into the hall of the Senatorium Imperialis, a cathedral of marble and gold, and slammed the Imperial Fist banner against the dais. "This council is blind," he said, his voice like thunder echoing across the chamber. "The beast comes for Terra, and you debate protocol." Silence fell. Even Lansung, flushed with arrogance, faltered beneath his glare. "You have fleets," Koorland continued. "You have armies. You have worlds. But none of them matter if the throne falls. I have seen the enemy that comes. You cannot reason with it. You cannot outrun it. And you cannot hide from it. It will burn the stars themselves to reach us. You either stand now, or you will die screaming when the sky turns green." His defiance broke the paralysis. For the first time since Ardamantua, someone had spoken truth in that chamber. Koorland proposed an ancient contingency, the Last Wall Protocol. It was a secret known only to the successors of the Imperial Fists, passed down since the days of the Horus Heresy. In the event that Terra itself faced annihilation, every chapter bearing the gene seed of Dorn would unite once more, reforming the 7th Legion for a single, final defence. A wall of yellow ceramite and indomitable will, the last wall of mankind. The High Lords hesitated. It was a desperate plan, one that broke every decree of the Codex Astartes. Guilliman's reforms had scattered the legions to prevent the rise of another Horus, but Koorland did not ask permission. He gave an oath. "If Terra falls, I will die upon its walls. If she endures, I will rebuild her with my bare hands." Then he left the chamber. His words spread like fire. Astropathic messages were sent through the warp to every chapter of Imperial Fist descent. The Crimson Fists, Black Templars, Excoriators, Fists Exemplar, and dozens more. Some heard the call and answered immediately. Others hesitated, bound by their own wars or pride. But slowly, inexorably, the Sons of Dorn began to move. The Phalanx, ancient fortress monolith of the Imperial Fists, was recalled from its distant watch over the Segmentum Tempestus. It burned through the warp toward Terra, its guns like mountain rages, its void shields glowing brighter than suns. Upon its arrival, Koorland took command, raising the banners of the 7th Legion once more. The last wall had been summoned. While the Astartes mobilised, Terra itself transformed. The Adeptus Mechanicus constructed new defence arrays on Luna and Mars. Planetary defence lasers were reignited after millennia of neglect. Millions of conscripts marched beneath banners of faith, chanting prayers that their emperor would deliver them from extinction. Yet even as preparations intensified, dissent festered. Lansung accused Koorland of overstepping his authority. The Fabricator General warned that the Phalanx's activation risked drawing Orc attention directly to the Sol system. The Master of Assassins, Drakan Vangorich, said nothing, but his eyes followed every moment, calculating, patient. Meanwhile, in the depths of the void, something stirred. Scattered reports spoke of a vast shape moving beyond Jupiter's orbit. Imperial Navy patrols vanished. Lunar Auspex arrays went dark. The Orcs were coming. The first of the beast's attack moons appeared on the system's edge, drawn towards Sol like a predator scenting blood. Its surface burned with green flame, its weapon batteries glowing like molten suns. 1,000 smaller vessels swarmed around it, each the size of a battleship, each crewed by billions of Orcs. Terra's defenders watched in silence as the largest invasion force since the Horus Heresy entered their skies. And yet, the people did not break. Because this time, humanity had a wall. Koorland stood upon the Phalanx's command bridge, armoured in gold and black. Beside him, the banners of the Imperial Fists and their successors fluttered under the artificial winds of the void. Vox channels filled the voices of captains, brothers and crusaders, all answering his call. "The Sons of Dorn stand ready," he said, "and this time we do not stand alone." Across the fleet, the litany of endurance echoed. Hundreds of thousands of Astartes reciting the same words in perfect unison. "Stone and steel endure. Walls may crumble, but duty does not. We are the shield. We are the wall." The void lit with fire as the first attack moon entered firing range. The beast had come for the throne world, and the last wall of mankind stood waiting. The Sol system burned. In the cold void between Mars and Terra, the shadow of the beast fell across humanity's cradle. What had begun as distant catastrophe was now at the Emperor's doorstep. The void was alive with the roar of engines, the crack of macro cannon fire, and the psychic hum of a million Orcs screaming for war. The first of the attack moons arrived in orbit like a new, hateful sun. Its gravity wake tore apart orbital stations and shattered the outer moons. Millions died before the first volley was fired. Entire defence platforms were crushed beneath invisible tides as the beast's war machine bled into real space. The green tide had come home. Battlefleet Solar was already crippled. After Port Sanctus, its surviving ships had limped to Terra for repairs, their numbers too few and their confidence shattered. Admiral Lansung, the man whose delays had cost half a segmentum, now commanded from his flagship Magnus Coronus. But when the Orc moon appeared, his resolve broke. He ordered his ships to pull back, arguing that a tactical withdrawal was necessary to regroup. The Vox channels filled with fury. Koorland, now commanding the Phalanx and the combined weight of the last wall, overruled the order. "There is no retreat," he said. "The walls of Terra stand. We stand with them." The Phalanx surged forward, vast as a continent, guns blazing. Thousands of Imperial Navy vessels rallied behind it, From ancient battleships to system monitors and scavenged freighters pressed into service. Mars itself fired salvos from its orbital forges, lances of plasma and magma cutting across the void. The defence of Terra had begun. The Orc attack moon returned fire. What came next defied imagination. A gravitic surge struck the Terran fleet like a tidal wave. Ships twisted, hulls buckled, and entire squadrons vanished into collapsing points of light. The Phalanx held, barely, its void shields flickering under impossible pressure. The beast's moon unleashed a torrent of energy beams, arcing through space like emerald light. A dozen battleships died in seconds. But the Sons of Dorn did not flinch. Strike cruisers drove into the moon's shadow, deploying Thunderhawks and drop pods directly onto its surface. The Orcs were everywhere, fortresses of scrap and steel, guns the size of hadblocks, and storm boys leaping through the void with crude rockets strapped to their backs. The airless war was chaos incarnate, fought in silence and death. Koorland's strike force carved a path toward the moon's core, planting cyclonic charges at key nodes. For every Astartes that fell, 10 Orcs died. And still they came, howling with fanatic strength, their numbers endless. Then, without warning, the moon began to pulse. Its surface cracked with green light, and the void itself screamed. The Orcs were channeling something through their weird boys, a psychic convergence that reached beyond the material. The moon was becoming a weapon of the warp. The Phalanx's augurs screamed with instability. The Adeptus Mechanicus called for immediate retreat. Koorland refused. He ordered the Phalanx to fire its main batteries directly into the moon's exposed fissure. The void exploded. The moon split apart in a titanic detonation that lit the entire system. Chunks of molten debris fell toward Mars and Luna, raining death across the heavens. The shockwave flattened orbital defences and sent half the fleet spinning out of formation. But it was done. The first moon was destroyed. For a brief, impossible moment, humanity cheered. The defenders on Terra's surface looked up at the skies, seeing the burning wreckage streak across the atmosphere like meteors, believing they had won. They had not. 2 more attack moons translated into orbit almost immediately, phasing into real space above the planet like twin omens of doom. They opened fire without pause. Luna was the first to fall. The Mechanicum's forges fought to the last, their macro lances firing even as their crust cracked beneath gravitic pressure. Entire manufactoriums slid into the void, burning as the lunar surface fractured and split apart. And behind the destruction came the invasion. Orc cruisers descended into the atmosphere, escorted by hordes of rocks and landers the size of cities. Within moments, the upper hives of Terra were aflame. Drop pods slammed into the plains of the Himalayan plateau, disgorging mobs of green-skinned warriors who tore through the air with impossible speed. The siege of Terra had begun anew. For the defenders, it was a nightmare given form. Across the shattered plains of the Imperial Palace, the Astra Militarum, PDF regiments, and millions of civilian levies manned the walls. The Adeptus Custodes stood guard at the Eternity Gate, their halberds blazing gold against the green tide. The Sisters of Silence moved through the smoke, cutting down weird boys before they could unleash their psychic storms. Every district of Terra became a battlefield. In the hive cities of the Pan-Pacific, tank divisions clashed with Orc gargants amidst the crumbling skyscrapers. The Ecclesiarchy's cathedral spires burned as priest-led hymns that drowned the sound of slaughter. On the ash plains of Antarctica, Titans strode into battle. Warlords and reavers of the Legio Ignatum trading fire with stomping Orc engines, their silhouettes framed by fire and ruin. Koorland led from the front, his armour scorched, his bolter spent, his voice carried across the Vox to every brother still standing. "We are the wall," he roared, "and this is where the galaxy breaks." From orbit, the Phalanx rained fire on descending moons, blasting apart Orc landers before they could reinforce the surface. Vulkan's name was invoked in desperate prayer by those who remembered the legends of the Primarch. Hope, faint but unbroken, flickered amidst the fire. Days passed. The Orcs did not tire. They came in endless waves, trampling their own dead to climb the walls of the Imperial Palace. The defenders fought from barricade to barricade, from sanctum to sanctum, every inch of ground paid for in blood. The Imperial Navy was crippled, the Adeptus Mechanicus divided, and the High Lords of Terra bereft of options. It was then that Jaskina Tull, the Chancellor of Imperial Tithes, proposed what she called a brilliant solution. Her plan was simple in theory, and catastrophic in practice. The Sol Systems merchant fleets, numbering in the thousands, would be seized. Every available transport, freighter and shuttle would be crammed with armed citizens, the dregs of Terra's population, hive labourers, dock workers, even penitents. With no proper training, no armour and barely enough weapons to go around, they would be launched into orbit to storm the Orc moon directly. Billions were mustered. The largest exodus in Imperial history left the cradle of mankind in a wave of ships so vast it blotted out the stars. Voxcasters blared with prayers of victory. Preachers declared that the Emperor's will would turn the tide. The Orcs laughed. The Green Horde largely ignored the unarmed flotilla, letting it crash down upon the moon's surface. What followed was slaughter beyond reckoning. For a few fleeting hours, the human tide overwhelmed the Orc by sheer mass, clogging trenches, overrunning strongholds, tearing Xenos apart with bare hands and scavenged tools. But victory was an illusion. With a single order, the Orcs collapsed entire mountains across the surface, burying millions alive. Explosions ruptured the crust, scattering ships and bodies alike into the void. The Proletarian Crusade ended in silence. Hundreds of millions died for nothing. The Orcs remained unbroken. The moon endured. And on Terra, the High Lords wept. Not from pity, but from the realisation that their brilliant idea had achieved only one thing, proving how desperate mankind had become. To the surprise of all looking up from Terra, the Orc response to this was a lone Orc vessel appearing in orbit above the throne world. It was not a warship, not a hulk, not even armed. It came bearing a single message, broadcast in low Gothic and crude binary translation. "The boss wants to talk." Against all reason, the ship was allowed to land. From it emerged an impossible sight, an Orc ambassador, clad in a grotesque imitation of imperial robes, his armour plated with gold, his tusks bound in iron. The creature's retinue carried no weapons, only parchment and banners daubed in glyphs of truce. The High Lords gathered in disbelief within the Senatorium Imperialis. Their guards aimed weapons, the custodians stood ready, and into that hall of marble and gold walked a Xenos. It spoke clearly, almost mockingly, through a translator engine. "The beast offers peace," it rumbled. "You stop fighting, we stop fighting. You don't, then we come again, and we come bigger." No one spoke. Even the most hardened among them could feel it. This was not a negotiation. It was a domination by words. The Orcs believed they had already won. When the silence stretched too long, the creature turned and laughed. "You don't look so tough now," it sneered. That was its last sentence. Inquisitor Weenund drew her weapon and executed the ambassador where it stood. The blast echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap. The Orc fell, its blood steaming across the polished marble floor. The High Lords erupted into chaos. Some hailed her as a hero, others screamed that she had condemned them all. But there was no going back. The Orcs would see it as the only answer humanity ever gave: defiance. In the aftermath, Thane and Weenod turned their attention to the greatest remaining threat, the attack moon still in orbit above Terra. Its gravitic field distorted the tides and weather of the planet, slowly destabilising its orbit. If it fell, it would obliterate everything the Imperium had just saved. To destroy it, they would call upon a new kind of weapon, one born of desperation and forged from Koorland's vision: the Death Watch. They were not yet the vast secretive order they would one day become. At this time, they were a handful of surviving Space Marines, veterans from shattered chapters, united by a single purpose. They had been assembled on Terra itself, during the siege, by Captain Koorland of the Imperial Fists, who realised the old ways of war could not defeat the beast's genius. The Imperium scientists called it impossible. Koorland would have called it unacceptable. A small band of Astartes drawn from a dozen shattered chapters, brought together on Terra itself during the siege. They were humanity's scalpel in an age of hammers, created to think as the enemy did, to learn their logic and turn it against them. It was Koorland who had devised the plan to destroy the attack moon. A plan so audacious it bordered on madness, to use the Orcs' own technology against them. The Adeptus Mechanicus had spent months studying captured Orc teleportation arrays. Their findings were unstable at best, suicidal at worst, but desperation had become the Imperium's only language. From those experiments came a prototype device, a network of massive teleportation beacons designed to activate simultaneously from within the moon. If triggered correctly, the Orc moon would be torn from orbit and hurled into the void. Failure, however, would mean catastrophe. The mission fell to the Death Watch kill team led by Watch Commander Orton Cassian, a veteran of the Imperial Fists and one of Koorland's last surviving comrades. They would strike directly at the moon's heart. While the Imperial Navy fought a desperate battle against the Orc fleet encircling Terra, the Death Watch launched their attack. Their strike cruisers pierced the void under a storm of green fire, navigating through wreckage and asteroid debris until they reached the moon's surface. The Orcs were ready. Their guns filled the void with plasma storms and energy arcs bright enough to blind Auspex readings. The Death Watch teleported through the chaos. A flicker of light, a burst of static, and they were inside. The interior of the Orc moon was a nightmare of scale and noise. Entire ecosystems of machinery screamed and shifted around them. Cathedrals of steel and bone pumped energy through arteries as wide as city streets. Mechs scuttled across the walls like insects, hammering plates into place even as gunfire erupted. The kill team moved like shadows through the chaos, each step guided by Koorland's creed. Precision through purpose. At the moon's core, they found the central gravitic node, a fusion of Orc engineering and unnatural energy that pulsed with a rhythm that could be felt in the marrow. It was here the teleportation beacons were planted, their coils humming with barely contained power. Cassian gave the order. The Adeptus Mechanicus had calculated the sequence. Each beacon would lock into the next, linking its power field until the moon's core was enveloped. When the sequence reached full charge, the entire mass would be ripped through subspace, teleported out of orbit and into the void. Simple in theory, impossible in practice. The moon's surface erupted with light, the void twisted, space itself began to tear. For a moment, the plan worked. The moon's outer shell began to blur, its edges flickering as the teleportation field expanded. The entire fortress was phasing, its structure breaking free from orbit. The Mechanicus crews cheered, Vox channels filled with prayers. Then the readings spiked. The Orc technology was never meant to obey human logic. The psychic field that held the moon together fought back, twisting the teleportation pattern into chaos. Half the moon vanished. The other half, the half still locked to Terra's gravity well, shattered. The explosion that followed was apocalyptic. Chunks of molten debris, each the size of cities, rained down through the atmosphere. Entire sections of the palace complex were vaporised as fragments tore through the upper layers of the hive sprawl. Billions watched the sky turn to fire. Even the Imperial Palace was struck, its outer bastions buckled under the impact. Entire wings collapsed into the dust. The Astronomicon spire flickered, its light dimming as hundreds of millions perished in the inferno below. For 3 days, Terra burned. But when the flames faded, the sky was clear. The green light was gone. The moon was no more. Humanity had survived, at unthinkable cost. Though the Death Watch's sacrifice had saved Terra, it was a Pyrrhic victory, the kind the Imperium knew too well. The moon was gone, but the Orc Empire still raged. Across the stars, the beast's remaining warlords were gathering, their psychic network screaming with fury at the loss of their greatest weapon. For the Imperium, there could be no pause. Terra would rebuild, humanity would rise again. But the stars still burned green beyond the void. And Ullanor, the cradle of the beast, still waited. Vulkan returned in mankind's darkest hour. On the ash-blasted world of Caldria, alone and unyielding, the Primarch of the Salamanders waged war against the Greenskin Plague. For decades, he had wandered the galaxy in silence, lost to Imperial record and memory. But now, clad in battered Terminator plate and bearing the mighty Thunderhammer Doom Tremor, Vulkan stood as a living bulwark. He slaughtered thousands of Orcs with his bare hands, broke war engines with his hammer, and fought with the fury of a demigod made flesh. Nothing could kill him. Not flame, nor blades, nor the relentless tide of Xenos that surrounded him. Word of his reappearance reached Terra, and with it, Lord Commander Koorland, the last scion of Dorn and the leader of the Last Wall. Koorland travelled to Caldera seeking the Primarch's strength for the war that now bled the Imperium white. At first, Vulkan refused. He would not abandon the people of Caldera while they still lived. Koorland understood. Together, the Primarch and the Astartes commander led a final assault against the Orc attack moon threatening the planet. Side by side, they breached its surface, slaughtered its defenders, and brought the fortress crashing down. Only then did Vulkan relent. He turned his eyes toward the stars and joined Koorland aboard the Phalanx. Upon reaching Terra, Vulkan entered the Imperial Palace to find the High Lords paralysed by indecision and fear. He addressed them not as a subordinate, but as a Primarch, shaming their cowardice, silencing their debate. There were no purges, no executions. Vulkan knew the cost of fracture. What the Imperium needed now was unity, and his voice gave it. He would lead the counterattack, and they would take the war to Ullanor. The Last Wall would march. No assault like it had been launched since the Great Crusade. Imperial Fists, Black Templars, Crimson Fists, and the remaining successor chapters of Dorn answered the call. They were joined by the Ultramarines, the Blood Angels, the Space Wolves, and more, a full coalition of chapters not seen since the Heresy. Alongside them stood the Lucifer Blacks, the Granite Myrmidons, and hardened regiments of the Astra Militarum, Scutari Legions, Cybernetica cohorts, and Agents of Mars prepared for war. Even Titans and Night Houses swore fealty. Vulkan stood at their head, and when a Primarch speaks, legions follow. They descended on Ullanor like a storm. The world was unrecognisable. What had once been a shrine to Imperial victory had become the beating heart of the Orc Empire. Sprawling fortress highs covered its surface. Gorkogrod, the capital, rose like a mechanical mountain crowned in iron teeth and gunmetal spires. A planetary void shield shimmered over the atmosphere. The sky bristled with missile silos, anti-void cannons, and scrap-built superweapons. Orbital bombardment proved useless. The shield held. They would have to go in on foot. The landings began under fire. An electromagnetic barrage from an Orc stratosphere cannon obliterated the first wave of Mechanicus landers. Still they came. Drop pods, shuttles, stormbirds, falling through storms of plasma and flak. On the ground, resistance was strangely disorganised. Imperial commanders noted the lack of unified defence. It felt too easy. That unease proved prophetic. As the Imperial advance approached the outskirts of Gorkogrod, the trap was sprung. Ullanor itself shifted. The ground cracked and trembled, buildings moved, trenches rotated. It became horrifyingly clear. The Orcs had turned Ullanor into a planet-sized weapon. The earth erupted with concealed artillery. Ambushes rose from disguised bunkers. Entire city blocks collapsed to entomb advancing squads. Orc war engines rolled out, some the size of battleships, others dragging captured Imperial tanks welded into their own twisted forms. Gravity-warping weapons, teleporter displacers, and psi-reactive armour turned the battlefield into an alien nightmare. Gargants emerged by the hundreds. Titan legions met them head-on. Macro cannons thundered. Plasma towers ignited the sky. Vulkan led from the front. Clad in his scorched black armour, doom tremor in hand, he became the rallying point for the broken and the bloodied. Where he stood, Orcs died in heaps. His presence was not just morale, it was myth made manifest. Even the Astartes, broken by attrition and chaos, surged forward at the sight of him. But the cost was staggering. Half the guard regiments were annihilated within days. 1 in every 3 Astartes fell in the meat grinder around Gorkogrod. No matter how many greenskins they killed, more poured forth. The beast was baiting them. Intelligence reports confirmed what Vulkan already suspected. Within the city, tens of thousands of mega-armoured Orc elites lay in wait. The real battle had not yet begun. So Vulkan changed the plan. Rather than break the city's gates, the Imperials turned their fury on the Orc supply lines. Koorland directed precision strikes against food reserves, munition silos, and vehicle foundries. The effect was immediate. The Orcs began to cannibalise one another. Fuel dried up, ammunition thinned. Discipline, already tenuous, collapsed under the strain. The beast was forced to act. Gorkogrod stirred. From the centre of the city rose a ziggurat unlike any seen before, towering above the skyline, etched in glyphs and wreathed in green fire. It began to move. What had seemed a temple was a war machine, a mega gargant. A walking fortress, larger than any recorded in Imperial archives. From the mega gargant's metal eyes fired beams of concentrated Waaagh energy. Every step it took crushed tanks. It waded into the battlefield like a god of war. Vulkan knew the truth. The Prime Orc was inside. This was the endgame. He gathered the last 3,000 Astartes at his command, a coalition of Salamanders, Fists Exemplar, Crimson Fists, and others, and led the charge. Imperial Knights and Titans engaged the Gargant to draw its attention. Jump pack troops and grav assault teams breached the leg plating. Vulkan himself shattered an access hatch with doom tremor and led his warriors into the beast. Inside, the temple Gargant was a foundry of nightmares. Vast tunnels lit by green torches, forges spilling molten iron, war machines clanking along rail lines. A dozen corridors became battlefields. Orcs in mega armour defended the inner sanctum with fanatical strength. Stompers fought in hallways barely wide enough for them, but the Astartes cut through. At the heart of the Gargant, they found him. The Prime Orc. A monstrous figure, 10 metres tall, clad in black and white armour plates, horned helm leering. For a heartbeat, it seemed a statue. Then it moved. It spoke. "Humanity is on its knees. I will be its end." The chamber exploded in motion. Bolters barked, chainswords screamed, but the beast moved through the storm like a juggernaut. Chapter Masters fell, Veilthor of the Blood Angels was swatted aside, Ultramarines were crushed underfoot. Vulkan called for the others to withdraw. They obeyed, except High Marshal Bermond, who refused. Koorland struck him down with his own hand. None would defy the Primarch's last stand. The chamber cleared. One Primarch, one beast. They clashed. Doom tremor against clawed fist. Psychic energy lit the walls. Machinery collapsed. Vulkan's armour shattered under the blows, but he did not stop. Grappling, they crashed into the reactor pit. A roar, a flash of green light. The core exploded. Silence. And then fire. Vulkan rose from the flames wreathed in Waaagh energy, his hammer ablaze with psychic lightning. He turned that power inward, reclaimed it, and made it his. With one final swing, he brought Doom Tremor down upon the beast's skull. The Prime Orc's head caved in. The reactor detonated, and the Temple Gargant tore itself apart in a chain reaction. From the outside, it seemed as though a second sun had ignited at the heart of Gorkaghrod. When the fire cleared, the beast was dead, but Vulkan was gone. And Ullanor was broken. The ashes of Ullanor still smouldered when the Imperium declared victory. Across Terra, pick feeds broadcast the image of the Temple Gargant's destruction, and the death of the Prime Orc at Vulkan's hand. In the great halls of the Imperial Palace, the High Lords dared to hope. The impossible had been done. The beast, the architect of mankind's near extinction, was no more. But the war was not over. Within the depths of Gorkaghrod, in the hours after the reactor's firestorm, the Death Watch and Mechanicus scavengers swept through the wreckage. It was then that a Vox recording from the final battle was decrypted. Amid the static and psychic interference, a message emerged. The beast had spoken in High Gothic. Not barked, not roared, spoken, with fluency. It changed everything. Koorland listened to the recording in silence. The implications were immediate and chilling. This was not an aberrant war boss, not merely a singular mutation of Orc evolution. It was something else, something orchestrated. In the weeks that followed, Imperial intelligence intercepted bursts of coded transmissions pulsing outward from Ullanor into the void. These were not distress signals. They were summoning calls, ritualistic broadcasts of dominance. The Imperium had not slain the beast, it had slain one of them. The beast had brothers. Koorland, the last son of Dorn, now bore the mantle of Lord Commander of the Imperium. It was not a title he wanted, but no one else could carry it. Vulkan was gone. The High Lords were fractured. And the Orcs had not retreated, they had simply regrouped. As the fleets returned to Terra, the weight of the truth bore down on the Imperium like a coffin lid. The war was only at its midpoint. The homeward journey from Ullanor was quiet. The remaining chapters of the last wall had been decimated. Hundreds of thousands of guardsmen lay buried in alien soil. Mechanicus Titans had been torn apart by greenskin monstrosities. And of the Primarch, there was no sign. On Terra, Koorland was greeted not with praise but with crisis. The High Lords debated the legitimacy of his authority. Lord Udo and Chancellor Virtuous decried his appointment. But Koorland was no politician. He did not seek approval. He addressed them as a commander, one who had walked through fire and survived. His authority was earned in blood, not decree. With Wienand of the Inquisition at his side, he restructured the council. Several High Lords were dismissed or removed by force. The Senatorium Imperialis no longer held the Imperium hostage with their hesitation. From that moment on, the Imperium was at war. Preparations resumed at once. Koorland ordered the mobilisation of all surviving forces. The Last Wall Protocol was reactivated. Chapters that had lost their masters were reforged under unified command. The battered Death Watch began to grow. Salvage Orc technology was brought back to Mars for reverse engineering. Koorland understood what others did not, that the nature of the beast could not be answered by traditional means. The Orcs had changed. Their psychic gesture had evolved. The galaxy's oldest enemy had become its most cunning. To defeat a thinking Waaagh, the Imperium needed more than firepower. It needed strategy. On the 15th day after Ullanor's fall, the second signal was detected. It emanated from a distant star system on the edge of Segmentum Solar, the former fortress world of Gathalamor. Astropathic relays were burned out. Vox silence fell across multiple sectors. An exploratory Mechanicus scout ship dispatched to investigate never returned. Then came the hololiths. A Death Watch vessel, the Shield of Antium, transmitted a short-range pick feed of the Gathalamor system. It showed an Orc attack moon, larger than the one that had threatened Terra, orbiting the planet. Beneath it, another fortress city had formed. Its design mirrored that of Gorkogrod. The second beast had awakened. Koorland convened a war council, not of High Lords, but of warriors. Representatives of the Space Wolves, Ultramarines and Iron Hands sat beside veterans of the Last Wall and commanders of the Astra Militarum. The Death Watch stood at attention behind them. No ceremony, no posturing, just plans. The question was no longer whether the Orcs could be destroyed, it was whether they could be understood. The enemy was psychic, coordinated, intelligent. This was a war of minds as much as steel. And worse, the Orcs were learning. Wheaton returned from her operatives on Mars with grim news. Fabricator General Kubik had grown increasingly uncooperative. Requests for weapon schematics, void shield designs, and access to Xenos tech had been denied. Mars had begun to operate like a state unto itself. Some believed Kubik was hoarding secrets. Others whispered he was colluding with the Orcs, fascinated by their psychic machines. Koorland did not trust the whispers, but he trusted silence even less. He issued a direct summons to the Fabricator General. Kubik declined. For the first time since the Heresy, the unity between Terra and Mars cracked. In private, Koorland met with Wheaton and Captain Vangorich of the Officio Assassinorium. Their reports detailed a disturbing pattern. Several key advisors within the Adeptus Terra had recently vanished or died in unexplained accidents. One member of the Navis Nobilite had been found dead in his quarters, his mind completely erased by what was later identified as psychic feedback. The Orcs were reaching into the heart of the Imperium, not with ships, but with thought. Koorland realised the beast had no need to invade, it was already inside. But hope remained. Among the wreckage recovered from Ullanor, Mechanica xenoarchaeologists had captured a living Weirdboy, one of the Orcs' psychic conduits. Interrogation was impossible, but its presence alone was an opportunity. Wheaton proposed an experiment. Using the anti-psycho null fields of the Sisters of Silence, the Imperium might be able to create a counter-signal, a disruption to the Waaagh Gestalt, a psychic weapon to sever the beast's control. The theory was dangerous, the consequences unknown, but Koorland agreed. There would be no second Ullanor, no second sacrifice. If the Imperium was to survive, it would fight fire with silence. The beast was not one, it was a legion, and the war, far from over, had just entered its most perilous phase. Koorland looked to the stars. Another assault would come, a final confrontation, and this time there would be no Primarch to lead them, only the last son of Dorn and the will of mankind. The air on Terra had not yet cleared from Ullanor's ash before the rot began to bloom. The people cried out in celebration, their cheers echoing through the hive cities, but behind the doors of the Imperial Palace, the High Lords met in silence. The illusion of victory brought them no peace. Koorland, now Lord Commander of the Imperium, knew that the beast's death had only uncovered a deeper threat. What had fallen on Ullanor was not the end, merely the first. Worse still, Terra's wounds were already festering. Reports of sabotage within the Administratum multiplied. Encrypted communications between segmentum fortresses went unanswered. Entire data tithes failed to arrive. Astropathic choirs complained of unseen interference. Not jamming, but something worse, a psychic static like distant screaming. The Orcs were not retreating, they were becoming something else. Koorland turned his gaze to Mars. Once, during the Age of Strife, it had been the Terra's twin in power and memory. Now it stood wreathed in silence. Fabricator General Kubik had offered no explanation for his absence at the post-Ullanor Council. More than a snub, it was a warning. At Weenud's urging, an inquisitorial envoy was dispatched to the Red Planet. It never returned. Days later, Kubik issued a terse reply. Martian sovereignty was not to be questioned. He claimed ongoing analysis of Orc scrap code was too sensitive for interference. No further visitation would be tolerated. The message was clear. Mars had broken faith. While the High Lords panicked, Koorland acted. He had no interest in the politics of outrage. He summoned the Officio Assassinorium, the Order Xenos, and the leaders of the Death Watch. He needed facts, answers, weapons, not theatre. From the lips of Inquisitor Weenud came the word that no one dared say aloud. There is treason in the Mechanicum. Kubik's refusal to cooperate was more than an academic rivalry. Under his command, the Red Sanctum had been feeding on Orc technologies, experimenting with their warp-infused machinery. Against the orders of the Ordo Xenos, the Fabricator General had overseen live testing of captured greenskin devices. Worse, Weenard's network suggested he had installed Orkoid logic engines within Martian systems, using Xenos warp circuitry to power new spheric uplinks. Orc scrap code had been integrated, willingly. To Cubic, it was pure logic. Orcs functioned on belief. Their weapons worked not because of science, but because they thought they should. In mastering that thought, he believed that Mars could unlock a new machine paradigm. To Koorland, it was heresy by another name. And heresy had a cost. The Lord Commander moved quickly. Communications with Mars were cut. A formal breach of trust was declared. The Adeptus Mechanicus, long considered a sacred arm of the Imperium, was now a source of threat. Koorland would not allow the Orcs to infect Terra through Martian arrogance. But Cubic was not the only problem. Within days, senior Administratum officials began to vanish. Vox thieves were found wired into relay towers. In one chilling incident, a member of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica collapsed mid-message, her mind liquefied by psychic echo. Not warp-spawned, not demonic, Orkoid. The beast, or perhaps a brother, was reaching across the void. A new attack moon had been sighted, orbiting the dead husk of Cathalamor. Transmission patterns matched those of Ullanor, but with one difference: frequency pulses laced with telepathic residue. The Orcs weren't simply building, they were broadcasting, probing. The second beast was watching. Worse still, its signal was growing louder. Amid the rising tide, Koorland leaned on the Death Watch. From their reformed kill teams, specialised strike cells were dispatched to silence Orc relay points, root out hybrids and scrap mutants, and hunt for anything resembling psychic amplification. Each mission brought more questions. The Orcs were coordinating with intelligence that should have been impossible. Their glyphs changed weekly. Their weapons bent natural laws. Entire kill teams returned change, not wounded, but visibly shaken. One Astartes, a Reclusiarch of the Executioner's chapter, recorded this before his death.
They saw us coming, before the drop. They laughed. They said the next one was ready, that we were late.
By the end of the month, the Death Watch had lost 5 full kill teams. The Orcs weren't just resisting, they were learning. Koorland knew that time was short. Vulkan had delivered a mortal wound, but the body of the enemy still moved. They needed a weapon, not a bomb, not another Astartes host, something different. The captured weird boy from Ullanor remained in stasis, monitored by a ring of Sisters of Silence. For days, it gibbered without pause, surrounded by blank souls that stripped it of psychic nourishment. But it had not died. It was adapting. Within its skull, something alien was building. Koorland ordered it transferred to a deep vault facility beneath the Imperial Palace. There, Weenard and the representatives of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica proposed the unthinkable: to use the weird boy's natural link to the Waaagh as a conduit, a reverse signal, and pair it with the null aura of the Sisters, a psychic implosion, one that might disrupt the Orc Gestel at its source. It was theory bordering on sorcery. The Ordo Malleus protested. The Astra Militarum command structure declared it lunacy, but Koorland listened only to those who had bled for Ullanor. "Nothing else worked," he said, "so we use what they fear. We turn their Waaagh against them." And in private, he confessed to Weenard, "If I must damn myself to save the Imperium, then I will." As the final preparations were laid, a message arrived from Segmentum Obscurus. A new signal. A third moon. Koorland summoned the High Lords. He said nothing of the psychic bomb, nothing of Mars. He simply showed them the images. 3 identical Primarchs standing shoulder to shoulder, roaring in unison across different planets, across different war zones. There was no longer a single beast. There were 6. 6 voices, 1 mind, a chorus of extinction. The room fell silent, and Koorland spoke the words that would define the Imperium's darkest hour. "There is no victory, only delay. If we strike now, we can buy Terra time. But know this, not all of us will return." When asked if he would lead it, he looked over the city beyond the spires of the palace, and nodded. The council broke up in solemn silence. The fleets were called, the last wall prepared one final time. Beneath the crust of the dying Mechanicus forge world on Caladrak, the weapon began to breathe. The Imperium would strike at the root of the Waaagh, or be buried beneath it. The final campaign did not begin with a fleet, nor with fanfare. It began with silence. From orbit, Cathalamor looked dead, a husk drifting in the dark, its cities shattered and unlit, atmosphere stripped away by earlier bombardment. but the second attack moon hung low in its gravity well, pulsing with eerie green light. The Orcs were still here, watching, waiting. Lord Commander Koorland stood aboard the Indomitus Sol, the flagship of the Last Wall. Around him, a council of chapter masters, inquisitors, and senior Mechanicus adepts prepared for the largest Astartes-led offensive since the Heresy. Yet despite their numbers, the room felt thin. Vulkan was gone. The Blood Angels and Space Wolves had not answered the call. Entire worlds were still paralysed from the first invasion. This would be the last strike. The plan was simple in design, but impossibly difficult to execute. The fleet would break the attack moon's outer defences, deploy kill teams onto its surface, and reach the core structure, an artificial cathedral fortress that intelligence indicated housed the second beast. Koorland, the last son of Dorn, would lead the strike himself. He chose only veteran marines for the assault, those who would survive Ullanor, those who knew what they faced. At his side stood Maximus Thane of the Imperial Fists, newly arrived from the Galactic East, a proud captain, hardened by decades of attrition war. Thane had not seen Ullanor, but he saw its cost on every face he passed. Koorland said only one thing to him before the drop: "If I fall, finish it." The Void assault began in fire. Imperial frigates punched through layers of void shields, opening narrow lanes for Thunderhawks and Storm Eagles to descend. The Orcs responded instantly. Gun platforms erupted from the moon's surface like tumours, launching storms of scrap cannon and plasma. Several transports were torn from the sky before they even reached the surface. Those that made it down found the ground already crawling. Orc fortifications burst open like wounds, disgorging mobs armed with grav axes and psychic amplifiers. Kill teams fought room by room, tunnel by tunnel, as they pushed toward the core. At the forefront, Koorland led from the front, his bolter barking, his voice a constant call of fury. He carried no relic blade or golden shield, only duty, only the gene seed of Rogal Dorn pulsing in his veins. The battle turned at the cathedral gates. A massive gargan, half machine, half shrine, erupted from the ground and blocked the final approach. Its armour was sheathed in burnished bone and black glyphs. From its chest cavity came a voice, not a roar, but a sermon. "You return to die, man-thing. We are 6. We are 1. You kill one head, the body fights harder." It spoke High Gothic. Koorland understood. This was not the second beast. It was a servant, a speaker, a herald. And then the gates opened. Out stepped the second Prime Orc. Taller than the last, its frame wrapped in an exoshell of shimmering energy. Psychic lightning arced from its fist. At its back, 4 lesser war bosses moved in lockstep, their faces marked with ritual scars. They were not lieutenants, they were limbs. Together, they moved like a single organism. The battle was savage. The kill teams fought with machine precision, breaking apart mobs and gunning down stompers from within. But nothing stopped the beast. Its blows tore apart dreadnoughts, its voice split stone. Thane saw it happen. One moment, Koorland was driving forward, leading a charge through the cathedral's central sanctum. The next, the Prime Orc appeared from the shadows. A single strike from its claw crushed Koorland's torso. He was thrown like a doll across the chamber. The Lord Commander did not rise. Thane fought to reach him, carving through waves of greenskins. But by the time he arrived, there was only a shattered helm and the silence of a Primarch's air, extinguished. The assault began to falter, morale cracked. One by one, kill teams were overwhelmed or pulled back under fire. Maximus Thane made the only choice left. He took up Koorland's broken blade and ordered a full withdrawal. The return to Terra was a march of ghosts. Waaagh met Thane on the docking ramp. No words passed between them. In the chambers of the High Lords, chaos reigned. With Koorland gone, power seekers moved quickly. Virtuous claimed emergency authority. Udo demanded a vote. The Senatorium nearly collapsed in open civil conflict. It was Thane who ended it. He stepped forward, still in warplate, and placed Koorland's broken helm on the council table. "He died for the Imperium, not so you could tear it apart." Then he turned to Waaagh. "Swear me in. I will lead the last assault." And so, with no ceremony and no celebration, Maximus Thane was named Lord Commander of the Imperium. He would be the last to bear this title in the war. Beneath the Imperial Palace, the weapon had begun to stir. The weird boy in stasis had not gone quiet. It had begun to resonate, vibrating against the void-black aura of the Sisters of Silence. A pulse, then another, then rhythm. What the Mechanicus could not build, what the Astartes could not kill, the Orcs had handed to the Imperium in their hubris: a key. Using the genetic markers and psychic echoes left behind by the Prime Orc, Weenid's team, now joined by the reluctant tech priests of Jupiter's moons, developed a field ray. A weapon not of fire, but nullity. It would not destroy the beast, it would silence the Gestalt. If the Orcs' power came from belief, the Sisters would become the counter-belief. Blank minds wrapped around a psychic amplifier, focused through the Weird Boy like a living lens. The test was simple. In a sealed chamber, 3 Sisters stood around the creature. When they activated the prototype, the Weird Boy screamed once, then fell silent. In that moment, every Orc within 20 kilometers suffered seizures. Some died, some fled. It worked. The Imperium now held a weapon that could sunder the Waaagh, but it had one flaw. It could only be used once, and it had to be deployed at the heart of the storm. Ullanor. Thane issued the final order. The last war would rise once more. A coalition of surviving Astartes, Deathwatch kill teams, and Imperial Navy fleets assembled in secret. The weapon, now called the Null Array, was housed in a massive shielded craft. Their objective was clear: infiltrate Ullanor, penetrate the core sanctum, activate the array, and kill the final beast. No one believed they would return. As the fleet departed, Thane stood alone in the silent halls of the Imperial Palace. He looked up toward the stars, toward the world where his predecessor had died. He did not pray. He swore. This ends now. They came in darkness. No grand proclamation, no ceremony, only void silent vessels. Halls blackened and scorched from 1,000 battles, closing in on Ullanor like a shadow cast across the stars. The final assault of the War of the Beast was not marked by banners or parades. It was marked by grim resolve, by the silent nods of warriors who knew they marched to their deaths. At the heart of the fleet was the Null Array, cradled within the armoured bulk of the Mater Ferro. Flanked by Deathwatch gunships and escorted by Adeptus Mechanicus warcutters, the craft carried the most dangerous weapon the Imperium had ever conceived. Not a bomb, but a silence. Not destruction, but unmaking. Maximus Thane led from the front. Since assuming the mantle of Lord Commander, he had neither rested nor wavered. He wore Koorland's broken helm at his belt as a reminder of failure, of what could not be repeated. Ullanor, once celebrated as the site of the Emperor's triumph over the Orcs during the Great Crusade, now stood as the crucible of their vengeance. Its surface had transformed. The planet pulsed with Waaagh energy, green lightning crawling across its skies, reality itself bent by the psychic pressure of the beast's Gestalt. 6 Prime Orcs still lived, or, perhaps more accurately, one mind spoke through 6 mouths. The Imperium's intelligence could not say whether each beast was a true warlord or merely a puppet of a greater intelligence, but it no longer mattered. What mattered was ending them all. The fleet's arrival triggered an immediate response. Planetary defence batteries awoke with mechanical howls. Orbit became a storm of flak and electromagnetic discharges. The skies over Ullanor were a death zone, but the fleet had no intention of fighting a war in space. The plan was brutally simple: deploy the Null Array on the surface, reach the core of the Orc psychic network, and detonate the anti-psychic wave within range of the Prime Orcs. Anything beyond that was irrelevant. The assault came in 2 waves. The first, a massive distraction, targeted the outer bastions of Gorkogrod, drawing the bulk of the Orc forces into open combat. Titans from the Legio Metallica walked into firestorms, drawing out the largest gargants for a titanic duel of god machines. Space Marine chapters, including the Fist Exemplar, Black Templars, and Deathwatch veterans, landed in coordinated strikes, carving corridors through the outer defences. The second wave, smaller, quieter, delivered the Null Array to the planet's surface. It was escorted by Sisters of Silence, a handful of tech priests, and a Deathwatch kill team led by Captain Bravus of the Iron Hands. Their objective was a nexus of Waaagh energy readings deep within a former mountain range now repurposed into a temple fortress of bone and iron. They met resistance before they landed. Weird Boy powered anti-air blasts lanced into the sky, forcing emergency teleportation of key personnel. The array arrived intact, but its field generator was damaged during the descent. Time became their enemy. The Sisters, calm and wordless as always, stood sentinel while the tech priests worked to restore the generator. Around them, the world raged. The deeper they moved, the more unreal Ullanor became. The Orcs had remade the planet not just physically, but psychically. Buildings grew from piles of scrap without visible construction. War machines crawled from chasms like beetles molting from steel cocoons. Corpses reanimated themselves, not from life, but from belief. Here, Orc logic reigned, and the closer the Imperials moved to the heart of it, the more impossible their surroundings became. Yet the Sisters of Silence remained unaffected. Their presence dampened the storm, pushing back the tide of madness by the sheer force of their null aura. Within their sphere of influence, reality stabilised. That stability allowed the array to function, but only barely. The generators could not maintain field integrity for long. They had to act quickly. Within the hour, the team reached the Eye, a massive chamber carved into the bones of the original Beast's temple. Here, the Waaagh energy was strongest. Pillars of green fire arced between pylons crafted from dead titans. And at the chamber's centre, 6 prime orcs stood upon a platform suspended above a chasm of living energy. They were not engaged in battle, they were chanting. The warlords were not merely warriors, they were priests of a new gestalt, a unity of will that had never existed among the greenskin race. Their combined presence amplified the Waaagh to a breaking point. The chamber throbbed with it, a psychic frequency so intense that several tech priests collapsed in agony. Only the sisters held firm, standing like pillars of stone amid the storm. The order was given. The null ray activated. The effect was not immediate, it was tectonic. A wave of psychic nullity exploded outward, expanding in a dome of absolute silence. Where it passed, orc constructs failed, machines stopped, lights died. The very colour drained from their surroundings. The Waaagh, which had saturated the air like static, was sucked away, leaving only stillness. The 6 prime orcs staggered as their link ruptured. In that silence, the Imperials charged. Captain Bravos and his kill team met the prime orcs in battle. It was unlike any fight they had prepared for. These were not just warlords, they were conduits for a collapsing godmind. Each blow from their fists caused seismic shockwaves. Each breath they took cracked with reality-breaking defiance. Yet the psychic silence had crippled them. They no longer shared thought, no longer moved as one. Bravos lost 3 of his brothers before the first beast fell. A 4th was torn in half as the second tried to escape, but one by one they fell. And as each one died, the chamber quietened further. Only the largest remained, the final prime orc, the original, the heart of the Waaagh. Thane was the one who reached him. He had fought through fire, ruin and death to arrive at that moment. The Lord Commander did not speak, he only raised his power sword and struck. The blade, humming with raw imperial light, severed the warlord's head cleanly, and the silence became total. The Waaagh ended. The surviving Imperials withdrew. The null array collapsed moments after activation, its generator fused into molten slag. The Sisters of Silence did not speak of what they felt in its final seconds, they simply turned and left. Above Ullanor, the attack moon shut down. Across the galaxy, orc warbands fractured. Some died outright, others turned on one another in feral confusion. The unity that had bound them, that had given them their monstrous coordination and impossible strength, was broken. The threat was not ended, but it had been decapitated. The War of the Beast was over. In the years that followed, the Imperium tried to forget the cost. Records were sealed, command structures reorganised. Statues were not raised to Thane, nor to Koorland, but to anonymous heroes, figures easier to lionise than to remember. Yet 3 legacies endured. First, the Death Watch. Formed from the crucible of this war, their kill teams became a permanent structure under the Ordo Xenos, charged with preventing the rise of another beast. Their black armour and silent creed became a symbol of quiet vigilance. Second, the dissolution of the last wall. With the threat gone, the Sons of Dorn dispersed once more, but never fully. They would answer the call again, if needed. And third, the weapon that had saved humanity, a silence forged in heresy and necessity. Thane never spoke of it again. The Imperium returned to its long twilight, no safer, no saner, but for one brief moment, it had remembered how to strike together, and how to survive what should have ended it. And somewhere, deep in the echoing dark, the last scream of the beast still fades. Not in defiance, but in silence. This transmission concludes the chronicle of the War of the Beast, an age when the Imperium trembled, when Terra itself burned, and the Sons of Dorn rebuilt humanity's shield from the ashes. The beast was slain, but its echo endures. In every war that rises, every world that burns, is a whisper of that ancient roar. Strike the seal of subscription upon your data slate and return for the next broadcast from the dark heart of the Imperium. Know this, Unity was born in that fire, and Unity must be born again each time the stars darken. For though the beast sleeps, it never truly dies.